I think there would be efficiencies to be achieved, which could result in a slowing down in the rate of rate rises, in the delivery of better services. I think with less positions being contested, there might be more candidates, and we might get an even better quality of councillor or alder people. That's what you're saying. Yeah. You know, I think that these are all sort of self-evident advantages. Although I acknowledge it is not necessarily the case that you would achieve those sorts of benefits. And in fact, I'm mindful of a comment that was made to me by Eva that in Victoria there have been some real problems with some of the amalgamations. But that's not to say there are always problems. There are obviously, in many cases, great benefits to be had. But this needs to be driven by the state government. Just as an aside, part of my agreement with the Prime Minister includes a move to include local council in the Constitution, which I know is an issue that is dear to many, probably people here tonight. That presumably at the next federal election, it would be accompanied by a referendum to address that, and also the issue of recognition of Indigenous Australians in the Constitution. And I think that would be a really positive step to enshrine in our very Constitution the local level of government and recognise its importance.
Chancellor Tory, then Pete. You've answered my first part of my question was, do you support the constitutional recognition of local government? Thank you very much for that. I wonder if you have considered the possibility that we don't need a state government. If you're talking about reform of local government, that you're not thinking of, should we need a state parliament? In a state of 500,000 people, most people realise we're over-governed. Most of the funding for the state parliament comes from the feds anyway. We're a small state with 12 senators and obviously 5 House representatives and 100 odd councillors. Should we go to the New Zealand model or the British model of having 2 layers of government, the federal government and a local government? And the local government, as you rightly said, and I support amalgamation, but not for the reasons that you're suggesting. I have other reasons why we should amalgamate, because I think that amalgamation, we've got to make sure that we don't lose services. Because I think every reform... Yes, my question is, do you think that we should consider a structural change and not have state governments?
Jeff, my apologies, I should have acknowledged you at the start too, when I acknowledged Helen and Bill. Sorry about that. Look, for now, I'm happy with 3 levels of government, including in Tasmania, where it's probably the clearest case of where there might be an argument for the abolition of 1 level. I do think that there is nothing wrong with a high level of political representation. I do think it is good that people have political representatives within their local community, and that tends to be your council representatives. You know, we are a federation of states. You know, Tasmania is hardly going to give up our statehood while all the others remain states. You know, that is our essence. We are a federation of states and territories, and I agree with that. And I'm not going to be the courageous federal parliamentarian who's going to suggest otherwise. I think we've got to look for ways of doing it more clever and more efficiently and more modestly within the 3 levels we've got. Having said that, I can see at some point in the distant future it is something Australia will need to give serious thought to, but I don't see it being in my lifetime.
Can I just say, you suggested today take over hospitals. Isn't that a fair function to make that?
No, I've advocated this for as long as I can remember, that 1 level of government should be responsible for certain elements of healthcare, and in particular hospitals. I've gone further today in Tasmania's case and said, in our case, it's not just a case of good public policy, it's show mercy on us and come and save us from our state government, because they have proven themselves unable to manage and to resource the minimum level of hospital care in this state. I mean, it does raise the question, at what point does the responsibility of a state government, at what point does it get to where you ask, why do you have a state government? But that's the sort of thing in the future, I think that then becomes the trigger for that discussion in the future. I think it's a very good point. I mean, if you took the hospitals off this government, well, they've still got other things to do. But there is a point at which you take, you know, to get efficiencies and all sorts of things, you know, you say, well, what now is the role of that government? And I think that's a point. I mean, it's not going to happen anytime soon, as much as I'd like it to happen that the feds take over the hospitals. But once they do, and they must at some point in the future, it must happen at some point in the future. You know, these become triggers for then asking those questions about what role of state government.
Well, we've got Corey, then we've got Dr. Hay, then we've got Bob Burton, and you're getting to AFL.
Just, Andrew, string together a few comments that you've made tonight about the sense of career politicians, the sense of mediocrity of our politicians, the sense of the politicians, many of the politicians that we have having no real life experience. Now, this is a pretty blunt instrument in some people's concept. What are your thoughts on term limits so that you limit the idea of career politicians and get in people that look at it as their sense of community service for a period of time?
Oh, Corey, what's your view?
I think I've been very clear on past times on my view on this.
Look, I don't have a considered view on it because I haven't given enough thought to offer you a reasoned response. One dimension of that which I have given thought to is whether there be a limit on someone being the Prime Minister or the Premier or even the Mayor, perhaps. Now, I know the US has a completely different political system. So some would say I'm mangling everything by equating it to the US system where a president can only do 2 terms. But I don't know, maybe that idea could be implanted in Australia, and I think that would be good. Because I do think that even the best political leader is at risk of becoming stale and arrogant and even mischievous as time goes on. So I think at that level, that is something I have given thought to, and I see great value in it. I don't know about members of Parliament like me. I mean, I think so long as you are doing your job and people are happy to be re-electing you, that is the democratic will of the people.
And you end up with the same problem you were saying in Canada.
Well, I mean, I campaigned, as you know, at the federal election last year by saying Canberra takes us for granted, do something about it. You know, it's been a safe Labor seat for 23 years. But you know what? That wasn't the Labor Party's fault.
Dr. Hay.
I've got a question that might be a silly question because it mightn't be answerable. But when we got the Parliament that we got in Canberra and when we got the Parliament that we got in Salamanca Place, I was deliriously happy because I want to live in a strong democracy, and I take the view that unless you have, it's not a hung parliament because a hung parliament is one that's not workable, but where you have a parliament where no one party has a majority, only then do you have democracy, because when a party has a majority of people on the floor of the lower house, the locus of decision making shifts out of the parliament and into the back rooms where the deals are made. What I'm concerned about is that, given the standing of these two governments at present, that the next elections are going to be, in a de facto sense, a referendum on parliaments, on minority parliaments. And I am concerned that the cause of democracy, which equates to not having a single party dominating a parliament, will be irreparably put back if that happens, and it looks like it will happen. And so my question is, this is why it might be not answerable. First I have to ask Andrew whether he agrees with me, but if he does, what can be done about that? Or is there some abstraction of huge power floating around out there in the ether that we mere mortals can do nothing about?
Peter, I do agree with you, and I think Tony Abbott has been very successful in persuading people that this Parliament, that this government is illegitimate, that this Parliament is unworkable, and I think the idea has taken hold in, well, there was already a great unfamiliarity with a power-sharing Parliament, you know, right back at the start. But since then, some people have, I think, been persuaded to believe it's unworkable, it's a bad thing. I actually think this is a good federal Parliament. I think it's working really well. And for all of those reasons I've sort of rattled through in my talk, I think it is a richer Parliament. It's stable, it's productive, it stands to be a remarkably reformist Parliament. And this criticism that particularly comes from the opposition about it, you know, we've got to have an election now, this isn't working, election now. Well, no, the 150 of us were elected fair and square, and our job is to make it work for 3 years. I don't know what the answer to your second question is, but I'm worried about exactly the same thing, because it's almost certain that at the next federal election, one party or coalition will win a clear majority of seats. We haven't had a parliament like this since 1942, I think. And I think we'll all be the poorer for it, because this is an amazingly rich, precious little period in Australian political history. And the danger is it'll go down in the history books for all the wrong reasons. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen in Tasmania, because I think with 25 seats and with the ascendancy of the Greens, I think it's going to be very hard for the Liberal Party to win a clear majority at the next state election. But we need to teach people in Tasmania that this sort of Parliament is good. I make the point again, I want to see the Greens and the Liberal Party cooperating where their interests overlap in the public interest, because surely their interests overlap in all sorts of ways. And of course, if we were to go to a unicameral Parliament in Tasmania, and I gave the New Zealand MMR as an example, I think the New Zealand experience is that it is very hard to get a majority Parliament with that sort of model. But interestingly, Peter, it took, I understand, the New Zealanders about a decade to become comfortable with their MMR. I think 1996 was their first election. It took to about 2006 before they were all comfy with it. They understood that it was normal. It took about a decade for that cultural change. I dodged the answer to the second one there.
Oh.
In your presentation, you flagged support for federal election cycle shifting from a 3-year term to a 4-year term. Having watched that suggestion float around over the last 15 or 20 years, it's always been advocated by business lobby groups, and always couched in terms of there's too much inability of government to take long-term political decisions. There's too much playing for short-term populism. Your rationale is slightly different, but still couched in terms of parties getting to election campaigning no sooner than they've been elected. But isn't a shift from 3 years to 4 years really going to just end up giving us less accountability and less democracy, and skew power in favour of those who are already largely wielded?
I do acknowledge that downside, and I do acknowledge that in New South Wales, during that last year of the last Labor, might be the last Labor, I don't know, the last year of the last Labor government in New South Wales, many New South Welsh people were lamenting the fact that they had a 4-year fixed-term election and there was no safety valve to allow them to dump what was such a deeply unpopular government.